I'm just waiting for the sequel where Indy finally passes the hat on to an adult short round. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the second film in the Indiana Jones franchise, the 1984 action-adventure prequel, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom stars Harrison Ford, Kate Capshaw, and Huy Quan, and was directed by Stephen Spielberg. Set in 1935, it tells the story of archaeologist Indiana Jones as he travels to India and is tasked with recovering a mystical stone from a cult. 3 years after the release of the iconic Raiders of the Lost Ark, Stephen Spielberg delivered an adventurous follow-up, or perhaps more accurately, predecessor. Because despite being the second film in the Indiana Jones franchise, Temple of Doom is actually a prequel, set in 1935, 1 year before the events of Raiders. The decision to create a prequel rather than a follow-up sequel was an interesting and somewhat unusual one, though in terms of the plot, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I watched the Indiana Jones films a lot as a kid, and I'll admit that it wasn't until I was in high school that I even realized this was a prequel, which certainly made the lack of continuity and lack of Marion make a whole lot more sense. Prequel or not, this is another memorable indie adventure. As I said, I used to watch the original trilogy a lot as a kid, and for whatever reason, this was always my favorite. It doesn't hold that title anymore, but I still have a lot of affection and nostalgia for it. The fact that this, the least kid-friendly Indiana Jones film of the bunch, was my favorite when I was young is kind of ironic. The tone here is absolutely wild. Raiders of the Lost Ark was also an interesting tonal and genre mix, going from adventure to comedy, with some creepy snakes and spiked skeletons and melting faces thrown in along the way. But Temple of Doom takes that tonal dichotomy to the extreme. Some of the most over-the-top and juvenile humor of the franchise is present here, but it's also easily the darkest film of the series. I'll get into the humor when I talk about the characters in a little bit, but let's talk about the darkness first. It had been a while since I last rewatched this movie, and holy crap, cults, human sacrifices, voodoo, heart-ripping, this is a dark story. Even Indy feels more ruthless with his foes this time around. It's no wonder that Steven Spielberg helped to advocate for the creation of a PG-13 rating after this movie came out. As with its franchise predecessor, the adventure aspects of this film are very fun. I prefer the temples and jungle setting to tombs and deserts, but even I have to admit that this film's adventure isn't quite as exciting as the one in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The first act is wonderful, with its 007-like opening and series of action set pieces, and the third act is fun too, with its action and plot silliness, but the second act is a bit of a slog at times. The story, especially through that middle section, isn't quite as enticing, so it's the action sequences that really keep this one moving. The raft adventure, the spike room trap, the minecart sequence, the bridge, it's not as consistently or cohesively entertaining, but Temple of Doom still offers some really memorable action sequences. So this film has got action, a bit of adventure, and darkness that more than borders on that of a horror movie, but it's also a comedy. There are certainly some similarities to the type of humor that we saw in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but this one goes beyond just the witty one-liners and situational humor, and really ups the physical slapstick comedy, while also incorporating fish-out-of-water humor as well as gross-out comedy. For me, the comedy is where some of this film's issues lie, but I do think that some of it works pretty well. Short Round is a character I've gone back and forth on over the decades. As a kid, I loved him. It was exciting to see somebody kinda close to my own age on this adventure with Indiana Jones. As I got a bit older though, I did find him to be a little annoying and kind of out of sync with the rest of the film. But now, I've come back around and settled on liking him. This was now Oscar winner Huy Quan's first role, and he gives a fairly charming performance and has great chemistry with Harrison Ford. His presence introduces some levity to the dark film, but it also brings out important aspects of Indy's character. Like I mentioned before, Indiana Jones has a bit of a darker edge to him in this film, so the softness that he has for Short Round is really important. There are several scenes that illustrate this, but my favorite is in the Spike trap room, when he's right by the door as it's closing, and could have gone out, but just clenches his fists in frustration and turns back because Short Round's still in there, and he cares about him and isn't going to leave him behind. For all the comedy that works in this film, there's twice as much that doesn't. The animal, bug, and not quite culturally accurate cuisine jokes are prominent and plentiful, but certainly get old after the first one or two jokes. But the worst offender here is the character of Willie. What a disappointing regression from Marion in Raiders of the Lost Ark. To go from a character who's the antithesis of the usual female character in an adventure film, to the most stereotypical damsel in distress character you could ever think to create is just mind-boggling. Kate Capshaw's fine in the role. She performs the character in the way that she's supposed to. It's just that this character was incredibly irritating. There are a few humorous moments here and there, like her early unknowing reaction to a snake, but Willie is mostly a big anchor, weighing down not only the adventure, but the film as a whole. So despite this previously being my favorite Indiana Jones film, I've now come to realize it's really just a big mixed bag. It has some of my favorite things in the whole franchise, but it's also got some of my least favorite things in the franchise too. Although I still like Temple of Doom a bit more than the average person, I can definitely understand why some people might dislike this one, or at least find it significantly weaker than the rest of the original trilogy. Nostalgia is probably helping it out a bit for me, but I still think this is a very fun adventure, and to this day, it's still the Indiana Jones film that first comes to my mind when I think of the franchise. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is the darkness. So I realize this is one of the more divisive aspects of the film and could easily land on the con side for a lot of people, but for me, this surprisingly dark tone is a big part of what's intrigued me since I was a kid. Raiders of the Lost Ark had some darkness to it, but nothing like what we see here. This movie has some creepy cult stuff, human sacrifice, voodoo, stolen children, and more, all set underground in a dungeon-like temple. Story, tone, and visuals are all exceptionally dark here, and that even rubs off on Indy's personality a bit too. The second pro has gotta be the action set pieces. Compared to Raiders of the Lost Ark, this feels a little less like an action adventure film and more like a horror adventure. So it's not quite as action-packed, but it still has plenty of memorable action sequences, including things that were originally supposed to be in Raiders, like the minecart chase. Much of the action here is imbued with the darkness that permeates the rest of the film, especially the sequences that occur in and around the titular Temple of Doom, but there's still the occasional rollicking action adventure of old, like the ridiculously escalating plane escape. On the con side, the biggest issue, far and away, is Willie. What an irritating character. Kate Capshaw does a fine job of playing her, but the character just seems so out of place in an Indiana Jones movie. I realize that fish out of water quality was intentional, but it's a one-note joke that gets old incredibly fast. She's frustrating as a character to begin with, but I think part of what makes her so infuriating and disappointing is that she's the follow-up, or predecessor technically, to the very capable Marion Ravenwood. Marion was a refreshing move away from the typical weak damsel in distress role that women all too often occupy in adventure films, only for Willie to be that exact stereotypical damsel in distress a mere 3 years later. Again, I know it was meant to be funny, but this character is such a disappointing regression for the franchise. The second con is a much more minimal issue, and is the pacing. Although I think all of the Indiana Jones films have at least some pacing issues, Temple of Doom especially gets bogged down by its story. The first act is fantastically structured, and the third act has enough action to keep things moving from one set piece to the next, but things noticeably sag during the second act. There are some action moments that are fun, but things mostly slow down as we learn about the cult and spend a little too much time on Indy and Willie's relationship. It never grinds to a halt or anything, but it does make the film drag for a while. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy through one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm going to give Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom 4 out of 5 paws. It's a fun, but quite different installment in the Indiana Jones franchise. It's got a much darker tone and an extremely irritating love interest, but boasts some of the most memorable action sequences of the whole franchise. I would recommend Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom to people who enjoy Raiders of the Lost Ark, but want something a bit darker. This sequel, which is actually a prequel, sets aside the Nazi stuff for at least one film, and focuses on a jungle-based adventure centered around a cult. We still get plenty of Indiana Jones, and there's still a lot of levity, especially on the character side, but the story, with its voodoo, cults, and human sacrifices, gets pretty dark. If you liked Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, I would recommend Raiders of the Lost Ark. An obvious recommendation for sure, but this first film in the Indiana Jones franchise really sets the stage for all that would follow, including, ironically enough, its prequel. It delivers on the action-adventure in spades, introduces Indiana Jones, and it also has a much better female character, Marion Ravenwood. If you liked the opening sequence, you might want to check out Dr. No. This first film in the long-running James Bond franchise has some similar suave and dire encounters, and also features a deceptively welcoming villain, only for things to go awry for the hero in an isolated lair. And if you really like Huy Quan's character, Short Round, and want another fun adventure film that's not quite as dark, you should watch The Goonies. Produced by Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, and based on a story he wrote, this swashbuckling 80s family adventure has an Indiana Jones light kind of feel to it. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite sequel that has a significantly different tone from its predecessor? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.